Welcome into Inside Carolina's Noon Dish. It's Wednesday. It's about 12:01. So Don Callahan is a minute late. I'm Tommy Ashley. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Appreciate everybody that's joined us live. I'll go ahead and tell you this is a recruiting show. I am Tez Walkered out. That news we covered in full yesterday. It is still a ridiculous situation. Of course, Inside Carolina will keep you totally up to date about the Walker situation and what's going on with the appeal. So make sure you stick with Adam and Jeremiah and the beat crew on that. But today, Don Callahan is in a school press box. Don, sort of tell us where you are, my man.
I am at Huff High School, which, if you follow recruiting, you're well aware of this school. It's crazy. I went to a scrimmage this morning against Dudley, another program that constantly produces talent. But I'm out there, and obviously I'm looking at the 25s and 26s, and the 24s that are out here for Huff in particular is just crazy. You got an Oklahoma commit, you have a Clemson commit, you have a forgetting there's one other. Oh, and a Penn State commit. So it's just crazy the amount of talent there's out there. And then that's not even getting to the underclassmen who I was there to see for the most part. So it was an early morning for me. I made the decision somewhat last minute, got up early, drove out here once I knew what teams were scrimmaging, because obviously scrimmages aren't really advertised all too well. But yes, so I'm in the press box at Huff. I thought about trying to get some sort of picturesque background for everybody, but it is hot. You sit in the sun, and I would be sweating right now. It's not so bad. I have the windows open, nice breeze. It feels good. I was sweating earlier. My one fear is, even though I am up here with permission from the coaches at Huff, you could have some sort of administrator or some other coach come in here and kind of kick me out. But so if that happens,
That's
we'll
when
have
you
to
just
figure it
say,
out.
"Do you know who I am? Do
Yeah.
you know who I am?"
That line never works for me, even in my household. So
Well, Don, you mentioned being at Huff, and it's funny. I was having a conversation about Huff and Myers Park and Drake May and all that yesterday, away from Inside Carolina. It's pretty incredible how stacked. You mentioned all the commitments, but it's pretty incredible how stacked some of these teams can be in high school, especially in that part of the state for North Carolina. I mean, the talent level and the stream of coaches that come through these schools, it's just wild to me coming from small town.
yeah, and I mean, a lot of it is there's a huge population, obviously, in Charlotte, and what tends to happen is the better recruits gravitate to certain schools. People talk about recruiting. I'm sure that happens to a degree, but for the most part, I mean, I've had parents kind of come up to me and kind of explain, why their kid ended up at a particular school. And in a lot of instances, it's the family who kind of initiates the situation, because I mean, if you have a wide receiver, your son's a wide receiver, your school doesn't have a great quarterback or doesn't have a great offensive line, and they're forced to play your son at quarterback or at DB or wherever, that's not really helping their recruiting stock. And there's a school not that far away that has a great quarterback, has a great offense, and known for producing kids. Then yeah, I mean, you're going to do what's best for your kid, and that's typically what kind of happens. So in Charlotte, yes, a lot of the kids kind of gravitate to Huff and Mallet Creek and Myers Park sometimes. It all kind of depends. And, it's also a little cyclical. Butler is also a big program too, but Huff just constantly just produces kids. It's absolutely ridiculous. And you look at Dudley. I'm out there and I'm looking at their secondary, and they have 325, or they have 325 skilled players labeled as athletes. One of them was playing for a rival school the year prior, but obviously, he played for Page High School. It's obviously a better situation for him. He has the better opportunity to get more offers if he goes play for Huff, which has a history. Coach Davis does a great job at Dudley High School as far as developing kids, putting together a team. If you want to win a state championship, you're not going to do that at Page, unfortunately, nowadays. That might have been the case maybe 10, 20 years ago, but that's not the case now. So you transfer to Dudley, you get more exposure, you play with better players and that sort of thing. It's just there is a noticeable difference when you go to some of these schools and you see even the coaching staffs, the assistant coaches. Chachi Sullivan, who's the longtime DB coach. I think he's the defensive coordinator. I think for Huff High School. I mean, he just constantly helps develop these kids, and there's schools who don't even have a great high school coach, let alone great assistant coaches who are training them. So, I mean, once you're kind of in it and you understand fully what's kind of going on, it makes it easier to understand just why all the transferring, why all the talent accumulation is happening in certain schools.
Yeah, to your point about it being cyclical, I mean, Page was stout
Yeah,
when I was back in the day, and then
50 years
Charlotte,
ago.
not that quite that long ago, but and then Charlotte
Yeah.
Independence was stout, and Southview on the eastern side. So
Well,
they've made a
Fayetteville
couple
is just
times,
completely. I remember when I first started, Fayetteville was always a stop for me,
and
and
now
now, yeah, it's been a very. I mean, you have kids here and there, Emery Simmons, a couple guys I know, DJ Jones, but I mean, it's very, very sporadic, and it's just crazy. Just a lot of it is just how with the mills and just the jobs and the population decrease in some of these areas just has kind of hurt some of these areas. Anson County is one, that's it's used to be really big when I first started, and now is you're not getting players.
it's crazy how it works. I mean, Douglas Byrd, 71st,
Yeah.
Southview, and then you had Jack Britt be created, and it sort of watered down everything there. And then, but Charlotte's always seemed to have it, and it's wild how it rotates through, Independence, Mallard Creek, Huff, Myers Park.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, these guys want to play for teams that are good. And these days, you play for a big time program in high school, whether it's in Charlotte or any other state, you get looked at. And if you're a lesser player, quote unquote lesser player, and all these coaches are on campus looking at other players, you might snag an eye or an
Yeah.
eyeball and get an offer. We've seen how that works. Um, when we're talking about 2025s, but let's back up and talk a little bit
Yeah.
about 2024. And again, talking with Don Callahan, it's the noon dish. If anybody missed the live reaction show from yesterday's news, a lot of it, padded practice, Taz Walker issue, check out that on YouTube as well. Adam Smith and Jason Staples joined me for that. But Don, talking about recruiting here, we had Gus Ritchie commit
Mm-hmm.
on the show.
Mm-hmm.
That was last Wednesday, wasn't it?
I know.
Or last
Last
Tuesday.
Tuesday. Yeah.
It feels like a month ago.
Yeah.
With everything that's going on. How cool was that? And everybody keeps asking me, is like, when is the next recruit going to commit on the noon dish? I mean, when you
Yeah.
deliver like that, you got to deliver all the time.
I just don't anticipate that happening ever again, to be honest. That was something where it was just a unique situation that just naturally came together, and that's the way Gus kind of wanted it. Well, that's the way Gus wanted to do something different, and we just started talking, and it started with, hey, let's get you on after you commit, to him saying, hey, let's just commit live, sort of thing. So I really appreciate Gus and his family for allowing us to do that, because I think it was a really cool, I don't know, it was a ceremony. I don't know what we want to call it, but definitely a cool podcast. And hopefully that's something that they like. I think really, the more I thought about it at first, before we actually did it, I was like, why would he want to do this? Our cheesy podcast. But then, afterwards, I was like, you know what, that whole like ceremony was basically broadcasted for an hour. I'm sure that they saved the video. I hope they did. I mean, it's on the internet, but they have that moment that's kind of now frozen in time for them to go back and review.
Yeah, I mean, it is cool.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, I did not do a good job of keeping track last week for the MVP. So yes, we'll just give it to Gus. Gus was
Yeah.
definitely the MVP of last week. So this podcast is dedicated to Gus. So,
Yeah.
but make sure everybody has their A games on today, because I'm watching. Tommy and I are
Yeah.
watching to see who's the MVP.
paying attention, and our top 5 today, and it's probably maybe a little premature, but we're going top 5 most important North Carolina players for 2023. Um, and so, yeah, and it's Don always defers to team news to the beat writers, but we're going top 20 or top 5 important North Carolina football players for 2023 this season, this upcoming season. So drop them in the chat. Drop questions for Don in the chat as well. Don, another recruit that announced, Jonathan Paylor.
Mm-hmm.
There was smoke flying around. There was, some misdirection, all this kind of stuff going on. He ultimately chose NC State. Um, Not really surprising. I'm not sure it really affects North Carolina's class a whole lot. They've loaded up at that position. But what did you think, and what are the implications, if any, of Paylor's commitment to NC State?
I don't know if there's any implications that I could think of off the top of my head. I think though it is a, people aren't gonna like me saying this, but it's kind of a sign that UNC is not dominating the state as it was when Mac Brown first came in. And if you look, last year NC State beat out North Carolina for Kevin Concepcion. That was a recruitment that UNC battled to the very end. In this class, you had Brody Barnhart, who some people after the fact are saying UNC didn't want him, but yet they invited him to the UNC Duke basketball game, which is pretty significant. They don't just invite any recruit to that. Also, there was Justin Terrell, who had committed to North Carolina, and then, with NC State being his last official visit, ends up at NC State, and now Jonathan Paylor, which was a significant recruit, and just a little bit of background on that. I can remember a year ago, actually, I was having a discussion on the message board, and because I had talked to a source very, very close to Paylor who said, do not discount NC State. Now, this is a year ago, and I was trying to express that to some of the posters, and some of them were like, hey, whenever the first time NC State actually beats North Carolina for a group, that's when I'll start to believe it. And this is not going to happen, yada yada. Why would he go there? This and that. I think some of it is like UNC fans don't realize they're UNC fans, and so if you really want to know what's going to happen, you kind of almost have to take off the Carolina blue shades and look at it as clear as possible. But in considering the fact that Paylor visited NC State and North Carolina pretty much equally, maybe NC State more. I mean, this source at that time believed that he had visited NC State more and believed that he had established a stronger relationship with Joker Phillips than with any other coach. Now, we obviously we go into January, and South Carolina somehow it becomes his leader, somehow, quote unquote, and he held South Carolina as his leader throughout. And then we started to kind of get there was some buzz maybe about a month or so ago that NC State was gaining some momentum, and there was talk of NIL stuff being put together that was able to combat South Carolina. And, we kind of laid it out. We talked about it. Did we talk about it on the New Dish last week?
A little bit. I mean, there were a lot of factors in play in Paylor's recruitment, some of which weren't going to be done at certain schools. I don't know if North Carolina. Everybody's heard the rumors and all. It doesn't matter. Yeah. Ultimately, the guy went to NC State, but there were factors that were not in North Carolina's favor.
See, all right. So now Eric is saying it was always probably that state college would get one of the top 24 players in the state. The discussion I had a year ago was actually the posters telling me, one in particular, and I'm not going to call anyone out, saying that NC State, until NC State actually beats North Carolina for a top in-state recruit, a national in-state recruit, they weren't going to believe it. So this is, we're kind of playing both sides of the fence here now, right. But here's the thing. And if you lay out the numbers, Mac was killing it in-state. NC State didn't have a chance in the first couple of classes. The tide has slowly started to turn, and it's becoming more and more evident. Now, could it just stop? Next class, absolutely. And Matt kind of win it back. He's probably going to need a really good season in order to do that. But the trend right now is not looking good for North Carolina.
I mean, I think Carolina will be fine with what they have. I think they're certainly happy and pleased with what they've got at that position
Yeah,
with the
yeah, yeah.
recruits and all.
Yeah, I'm
So, I
talking
mean,
more big picture and all that. But yes, at that position, you look at the receivers, Alex Taylor, Keenan Jackson. I mean, even in the prior class, everyone knows I'm a huge Chris Culliver fan. I think he's going to be an absolute stud at UNC. So, I mean, there is tons of talent. I'm just talking about big pick and really like that Justin Terrell I thought was okay. I didn't think he was a great defensive player. It's not that big of a deal for UNC to lose to him. I think it's just UNC lost him to NC State, and that's just never a good look, especially when you were just absolutely just holding a shutout for a couple of classes.
yeah, I mean, I think it's unrealistic for folks to expect the shutout, as you put it there. But the bottom line is, you can only take so many players, and other schools are recruiting too, by
Mm-hmm.
whatever means we want to talk about. You want to
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
about
yeah.
paying players with NIL or offering them this and that, whatever. And that certainly matters. But other schools are doing their stuff too. Speaking of NIL and specifically Heels for Life, everybody in this chat, be on the lookout for Joey Powell's interview with Graham Boone. That'll drop tomorrow. Graham Boone, of course, the executive director of Heels for Life. He has a lot to say and a lot to discuss about the NIL portion and the recruiting side of it, even, and then how players are looked after or taken care of. The Carolina, quote unquote, Carolina way of handling NIL. And of course, he talks about the last week with Eric Church benefit and all that kind of stuff. So that'll drop tomorrow. It's not live. Joey's already recorded that with Graham, but it'll drop tomorrow. So check out that. It's a lot of good information on that side of things. Don, before we move on to 2025, there's still another commitment out there, or another announcement out there, I should say, a commitment announcement. In Javaris Green,
Mm-hmm.
that's still what, August 18th, which is, I guess, next Friday.
Yes. I believe it's their opener, their season opener.
And so tell us the plan as you know it for that announcement. God, high school football is already starting next Friday.
It's
Is that
it's crazy. Yeah, that's a
it,
game. It's an actual
yeah,
game.
a real
So
game? Is that a pregame announcement, a postgame
so I
announcement?
gotta
What do you
find
think?
out. I gotta find out details. I probably won't know them until next week. I haven't reached out yet to get exact details. He's told me a little bit of what the plan is. I think so. They're playing, I believe, Gaffney, and the plan is, I guess that game is being streamed or telecast or something along those lines. And the hope from the group that is streaming, showing it, whatever, is for him to do it live right before the game. So that's tentative. Obviously, as we know, there's lots of logistics that are involved with those sort of things. So that's definitely something that I will be looking into to figure out how Inside Carolina can cover it, obviously, because his finalists are North Carolina, Michigan State, and Alabama. You probably actually no probably, let's just forget about Alabama. He never officially visited there. He only visited there once. He officially visited North Carolina and Michigan State. So it obviously comes down to, that distance, being in state, that sort of thing. So I think it will come down to those two schools.
That's crazy to have to worry about where I'm committing right before I play a game. That
Well,
seems
so we did a report with him. It might have been 2 weeks ago, where he actually said he already made the decision. So
okay.
now it's just a matter of the presentation. And if you've ever seen these pre-game presentations, I've seen a couple of them. They're not elaborate for reasons that you're kind of alluding to. You have other things you got to worry about, especially the first game.
Yeah, and it's not like they're playing a FCS opponent
No,
that's no
they're playing
good.
Gaffney.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they start off with a bang there. 2024 class, we've discussed it. You've talked about what may be next in that class. Just sort of reiterate that for our people that are listening. And shout out to the new folks. I see some new names in the chat. 2024, I guess they're done unless other names emerge here early in the high school season, right?
So they're
Or not
done.
technically done,
Yeah,
but
yeah. Well, you never know when you're actually done. You never want to shut the door, but they do want a defensive lineman because, as I mentioned, the Justin Terrell kid was kind of slated for that D line spot, so they want another D lineman, and so from what I gather, I expect that to be, it will most likely be a kid that we haven't heard of before. It's going to be a late bloomer. It's probably going to be a kid who, for whatever reason, didn't have great seasons prior and is playing well this season. Last year there were a couple of guys, UNC was looking at some DBs, skill guys, and a couple of them emerged. One was playing out of position. The other one was a quarterback who schools are now giving him a look at DB because he had played a couple of played safety in a couple of games, and schools like some of his film. So I expect that sort of scenario to play out where it's a kid that UNC it wasn't even on UNC's radar prior to the season starting.
so that's an interesting take. It's 12:23. I'm gonna do a Johnny T-shirt deal early. Usually do them at the midway point. Don Callahan live on location at Huff Height. No commitment coming today. We're not
Nope.
going to have somebody walk through that door and commit to North Carolina here on the noon dish. But I want to say a couple words. Johnny T-shirt and JohnnyT-shirt.com. It's a great time to get your gear for North Carolina's football season coming up. It is hot and heavy on the beat. It is hot and heavy in Chapel Hill starting Monday when students start moving back in, but you need to get the Johnny T-shirt if you're there for that. Get by Johnny T-shirt, visit them in store, take care of them, great customer service, and you're 10% off. If you're watching this, you've got Inside Carolina Premium. If you happen to not be on Inside Carolina Premium and you're in here, go click it, get it, and you get that 10% off and a bunch of other perks that you get. I mean, Paramount Plus, all that kind of stuff you get. But the Johnny T-shirt discount is free money. Take care of them. Take care of Johnny T-shirt. National Guys Who Pay the Bills. It's noon dish. It's Wednesday, August 9th. All right, Don, we're back with the noon dish.
Can I ask you questions?
You can ask me questions, or we can talk about your scoop without giving away the scoop because I have some questions off that.
All right, why don't you ask those questions, and then I'll have some questions for you.
Good deal. We can do that. So, weekly scoop you dropped yesterday. It is sort of a look ahead to the 2025 class. So I don't want to give away a ton of that, but I do want to kind of ask you. You've got a lot of names in state in this report, and like I told people, if you're not on premium, you need to get it so you can check out Don's work and check it out here, not where it gets recycled out in the ether by some folks. Potentially by some folks. But anyway, I digress. National recruits, high power 5 recruits. Explain for listeners what you consider to be a national recruit, because it doesn't necessarily mean that these are the only kids with offers nationally. What do you mean by national recruits?
So the goal of this is to kind of be, and this is what I've done for years in preparation for my my top, well, now it's a top 25 in-state rankings, which I've been doing for, I don't know, 15 years or whatever it is. And this just kind of gives me a good jumping off point for all these guys. And I hope people understand that, and I can't emphasize enough that this is just a guide, a good starting point. And the thought is that players or prospects are going to move up and down these quote unquote tiers. And then from the tiers, I wanted to kind of lay out who are the guys to kind of look at. In this, I started this a year ago, and I didn't want to do a ranking because I don't think that's fair for me and for the kids and all that sort of stuff at this early on. So Ben and I came up with the idea of doing tiers, kind of tiering them and where they kind of sit at from, and what sort of interest they're getting at this point. And so the national, to answer your actual question, the national recruits are guys who are being truly recruited nationally. That doesn't just mean you have an offer out of nowhere from, you know, Alabama, and they aren't talking to you. That means like David Sanders has an offer from Alabama and he's visited there multiple times. So clearly there's a mutual interest sort
Yeah.
of thing, you know. So national, it to me is like when you are being seriously recruited by basically playoff contending schools, Georgia, Alabama, Clemson. I mean, I would throw even schools that haven't made the playoff, like Texas, in there, if they're legitimately recruiting you and that sort of thing. Oklahoma, on and on and on. So that's what that category. The high Power Five. I wanted to do it last year. I decided not to. After I posted it, I regretted doing the high Power Five. I probably should just throw all the Power Five guys in there, just because. And I didn't really get a whole lot of pushback, but I think a couple people were kind of confused. But again, it's just guys who are legitimately getting recruited by schools that maybe not playoff caliber, but or maybe it's just one playoff caliber guy. You know what I mean? Like schools that are competing for conference championships and all this sort of stuff. The categories are purposely kind of vague because because it's just a guide, and the whole idea is that. And I mentioned this, and this is where I think it threw some people off, was when I did this exercise a year ago, I had 16 prospects listed as Power 5 or above, okay? And what ended up happening was right now I think there's 41 Power 5 commits. So the thinking is and if you go back and look at who's in the group of 5, where Ziegler was in the group of 5, Khalil Connolly was in the group of 5. There was all these guys, that were in the group of 5 who eventually scored offers or scored interest or whatever, or showed what they needed to do, and then were able to kind of move up. So you look at that list and just think. I mean, obviously, if you're David Sanders, you're not getting better offers than what you already have.
Yeah.
But if you're in that group of 5, there is definitely the potential for you to kind of go up. Now, I'm not going to go into details, as you said. We don't want to go into details. But when I kind of broke it down and looked at it, I felt like actually looking at the Power 5 group, there was a lot of guys who could definitely make that leap up to national or high Power 5 recruit. But at least in the current group of 5 group that I had, I didn't feel like there was a whole lot of, ascension potential, because I felt like a lot of those prospects have kind of, group of 5 is probably where their ceiling is at because of, measurables and that sort of thing.
So if you were a high school recruit, you were a high school recruit when you were in high school, where would you be on this list?
I would probably be nowhere near it.
NAIA, would you make that level?
Maybe intramural. I mean,
Third team intramural
yeah,
all conference.
all intramural flag football.
So basically, just to sort of water it down a little bit, national recruits can go anywhere they want in the country. They had that ability. Most of them have that ability anywhere they possibly want. High Power 5, they've got their fair share. Power 5, we know what that means. And then group of 5 guys, as you see it now, and folks need to understand, these guys are going into their junior season in high school, so they still have a lot of growth in them. Going to be college players, and it's a big deal to play college level football. It always cracks me up how I hear people, especially on the high school baseball side, you got to go D1, you got to go D1.
Yeah.
All of these guys are D1 prospects here.
If I can, I guess, pull out an example.
Go for it.
All right. So I'll use Bryce Baker, and I actually did lay this out in the scoop, so just giving a little sneak preview. I have him as a Power 5, but I mentioned the fact that he's transferring we talked about transfers earlier. He was at Walkertown, which is not even that, I don't know, less than 10 years old of a high school. He's transferring to East Forsyth High School, which has won state championships within the past 10, 20 years, has Coach Todd Willard, who has been there for what feels like 100 years, one of my favorite coaches to deal with. Absolutely nuts, but he's great. Um, but they have a great staff there that has been there for a very long time. They run a great offense. So you're taking a kid with his talent, and he also feels every time I see him, I feel like he's grown an inch. So, and then he's going to go to this school. He's going to put up massive numbers. Probably going to make a long, deep state championship run. That's only going to help his stock. Fortunately for UNC, he's committed to UNC, but his stock's going to rise. And so I feel like he's a guy who could. I feel like the offers could continue to flow in for him based off of what he does this season.
It'll be interesting to watch. And again, folks need to check out this. It's just fascinating how many names and how much content's in one weekly scoop by Don Callahan. And we hit on it. We don't go into detail because you got to get on the premium to do it. And I need a not a breaking news thing, but I need like a buzzer. Shout out to Will Reason. He says
I was
this is
reading
the
that too.
first time. You know, I got to mention it cracks me up, but it's not the first time I've heard it actually.
Well,
But
who is Luke Bryan?
oh my God, you don't know who Luke Bryan is?
No, is he a country singer?
He's a country singer,
Okay.
and I think he's on like American Idol or one of those shows too. I can't keep them all apart, but anyway, shout out to him. He says first time able to get off work and watch it live. If you are in here for the first time live, give us a holler in the chat as well, and also drop chats for drop questions for Don. Will the top 5 today is top 5 current North Carolina football players most important for 2023. We've got several in there as well. All right, you wanted to ask me some questions.
Yeah.
Don.
Well, first question. This was not one of my original questions. Do you encourage people to take off work to watch, or I guess, watch the Noon Dish live?
I encourage them just to do it at work. Just
Yeah.
turn the volume down or put
On your lunch break.
put your earbuds in or watch it on. Yeah, absolutely. And since I'm retired, yeah,
Yeah.
screw it, man. Just get online and watch us during work hours. I mean, you got to eat and you got to listen. This show is as important as eating lunch.
It
Do 'em
is,
both.
right? I would not eat lunch that day and watch this show. That's how important
Yeah,
it is.
I would. Yeah, I would maybe eat my sandwich and watch the show if you need some nutrition and some hydration. But I mean, people get out here and they join us. It is awesome. However few, however many, it's amazing that people take their times out of their day to watch us here at noon on Wednesdays. More questions. I'm an open book, Don.
All right. So let's say I have a friend who gambles, and they have a working theory that the defense will actually be better this year because of the maturity. Because a lot of these guys who came in are now going into what I guess their third year now, fourth
Yeah.
year. So how does the defense, from what you've seen, and I know they don't show you a whole lot, but has the defense look better?
They look better. And
Okay.
as Jason Staples and I talked about yesterday, and of course, I'll be totally honest, we said this a little bit last year as well. You have to discern whether the defense is getting better or the offense is getting worse, or vice versa, right? You don't want to go in saying, "Well, we know North Carolina's offense is dominant, and now the defense may be dominating them in practice at times, so that means the defense is great." We'll ultimately find out on September 2nd. But from a pure physical maturity standpoint and a look-see, as Jason Staples likes to say, off the hoof, these guys put in the work in the offseason, and they've made some improvements, and they've made strides, I think, going up against that offense. You've got an offensive line that is, as old as it gets in college football, and now you've got a defensive line that is becoming mature. They were the 21 and 22 classes, Mac's early classes are now getting some age on them. So I think just in the general course of development, without any coaching, you get better, right? You improve, you get more mature, stronger, and all that. And I've said it on the show, and I said it yesterday. Tamari Fox
Mm-hmm.
is going to be a problem
Mm,
for folks, and he looks very good. I think they'll be better. We'll have to wait and see. There'll be no excuses if they're not, because you can't say they're still young.
yeah.
You can't say they don't have depth, because they've got
Mhm.
some depth now. They need to
Yeah,
stay
Max
healthy.
says that, like, all the time, and I'm like, you could say it when you first arrive, but, like, now if you don't have depth, now it's your fault.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yes, I agree with that for
But,
the
I mean,
most
I
part.
think there's depth. I think there's depth there.
Yeah, but I think you have to build it,
Yeah.
and if your depth is a freshman or a true sophomore and all, then is that really depth, college level P5, high major depth? I think they're getting there. When you've got a guy like Javari Ritzy that will potentially be, the second string three technique.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty solid,
That's a
right?
kid who played a bunch as a true freshman.
Yeah, so they've built that. They're not there across the board, but I think on the defensive line, they've got bodies there that can be effective that they haven't had in the past. And I'm not giving any justification for how poor the defense has been the last couple of years, but they have addressed issues that were issues last year. We'll see how it plays out against South Carolina, because South Carolina's going to come out and want to kick them in the teeth, just like they did in the bowl game a couple of years ago. And you know, when you play in that game, there's nothing more that South Carolina and vice versa want to do than to bully one another. Who can do that the best, I think, will be important to watch. Offensive line, mm, they need to get some things cleaned up and get some things sorted out, and those guys need to get better, and I think they will as well. But the defensive line, to me, first look and what we've been able to see, certainly looks clearly better than they have been.
I know this is difficult to tell in the practices you see, but I mean, to me, the biggest question mark is, is the defensive line getting pressure on the backfield, on the quarterback, on the running game? And I don't feel like that has been the case, the past, well, definitely not last season. And I don't think it's really, and Chiswick's not a big like pressure guy. So do you think that they're going to be able to get some pressure on the backfield?
I think that they have taken steps to do that. We highlighted Des Evans. Des has always been that strong arm rusher, and he
Yeah.
uses his arm to do that sort of stiff arm. Well, he displayed a spin move yesterday in
Okay.
practice that we've seen maybe a couple times in his life. And
Hmm.
to Jason's point last night, he does that in the game and it works, then that's a sack if he
Yeah.
finishes the play. And that alone is something that decreases. They brought in Ted Monachino to help develop more pass rush and all. And so they've been working on it. And I don't think we can discount having Kamen Rucker, who is a problem, and then Amari Gainer for Florida State. I mean, you put those guys on the edge, and again, it's one of those things like if they don't get better and if they're not improved and they don't get more pressure during season, then something's fatally wrong in the program. But I think they will, and I think they have the ability to do that, especially when you add somebody in the defensive backfield like Elijah Huzzy
Hmm.
that can just take away a guy. You
Yeah.
know, there's not going to be a situation with him out there where a quarterback can get immediate pressure and have somebody wide open. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just not going to happen with Huzzy. So it's interesting to watch. And of
So
course, I'm the guy. I'm the one that gets overly optimistic and then makes a prediction 5 or 6 years ago. It feels like, and people are still yelling that at me when they see me in public.
so yeah, well, but if you make a negative, if you're critical, then everyone's going to say that you have something against North Carolina, or you
Yeah.
have you know what I mean. So it's like,
Well, I try to be, and this is what's interesting to me about that is when you have, and I'm not tooting inside Carolina's horn at all here, it's people that cover it on a daily basis. What I have a problem with is when people flash in and flash out and they have something to say about it. Like you get a national guy, and this is a point that Mac would make a lot, I think. You get guys that don't pay attention every day and they see something bad happen, and then that's all they talk about. I'm
yeah,
going to tell what I see. I've been doing it long enough to know and to understand the difference. But I'd like to think that anything I say or anything that the rest of us say here in South Carolina is based on at least knowledge,
Yes.
or as
Yeah.
much
Yeah. Yeah.
knowledge as you can get, rather than just looking at a box score or seeing a fourth quarter of a game, 11 months ago. So
Yeah. And I think in general, and I'm not going to dive into this rabbit hole, but society in general, it's like everyone acts like you have something negative to say. It's like the worst thing in the world. You're the worst person. But in reality, things are positive and things are negative. That's just how it is. But
and
anyway,
ultimately it comes down to wins and losses. That's
yeah,
all that matters.
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. So here I disagree, and I think the 9 wins last year is why I will counter with that, because everyone's not happy with 9 wins, because not every win and not every loss are the same. And I was listening to some some podcast it was a national podcast, but they were talking about North Carolina and their wins and losses and everything like that, and they're talking about just going back to the FAMU, right? Yeah, the
Yeah.
FAMU game, and how North Carolina should have just absolutely dominated them, not just because the talent level was just so on different levels, but FAMU, which I completely forgot, was shorthanded, didn't know who was going to play, so their game plan was kind of screwed and all this sort of stuff. But yet, I mean, UNC won convincingly, but that wasn't a good look. And then you just go through each game. You have the app game, which we don't need to talk about. You lose to Georgia Tech with crappy Georgia Tech team. You just fire their staff, and they have a third string quarterback or whatever. NC State had a third string quarterback. And then even like the other games, I mean, the ACC wasn't good last year, and UNC didn't dominate really. I mean, I guess maybe the Pitt game, I guess, was a
They dominated
domination.
Pitt. They dominated
Dominated
Virginia Tech.
Tech. Yeah,
I
and those
think
were
Pitt was pretty good. Virginia Tech, not so much. I
yeah.
mean, the bottom line is here's how I look at it. You know, they won 9. That's more than
Mhm.
Carolina's won. However, whatever
Yeah,
the
and that's
stats
and that's
are.
great.
But I do think they left opportunities out there. It should have been an
Yes.
11-win season and all. Um, and how it ended. And when you lose to NC State, it doesn't matter if they'd gone 11-1 and lost to NC State. Some people would say it was a failure, and I get that. I understand the rivalry, and I think maybe more intention needs to be placed on that game than there is. But you know, we know how they won those 9 games. It
Yeah.
was a lot of Drake May miracles. Well, if they'd have
Yes.
won 11 and they lost to Clemson in Oregon in the bowl game and gone 11-3 or whatever, would you feel any better about it? Would it make
I
a
think if it was
substantial
so
difference
I
in
think
this team this year?
well, I mean, probably not this team. But I think the thing was, if I can kind of tie it all together, is it almost like I felt like every game you're waiting for that disappointing loss because of all of the problems you saw happen in those wins, and that happened finally in the Georgia Tech and the NC State game. You know what I
Yes.
mean? And it was the defense, and I don't know. Max says it got better. I don't know. Maybe it did, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think. Well, I think the numbers. If you look at the numbers across the season, and Greg Barnes does a great job laying these out, uh, they didn't get better.
Yeah.
They may have given up less points, but I guess that's better. Anyway, I don't. I definitely don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But you know, if they go 11-3 last year, I don't think it's other than they went 11-3. I don't think it.
Well, so who are the 2 extra wins? I think that matters. You beat NC State. Well, so you beat NC State and Georgia Tech, and then still lose to Clemson
Yeah,
and Oregon. Yeah, I mean, I guess you're probably right. You know that
I
that.
don't think would people think that Carolina was dominant last year. What
No, I still think because yeah, I still think that there will be question marks, because I still think that even though because like I said, a lot of those wins, UNC just didn't win the way you felt like they should, considering how much more talented they were than their opponent. So even though you beat NC State, you should have beat Georgia Tech. So if now one of those wins is Georgia Tech, well, you should have beat Georgia Tech. And really, you should be NC State. I mean, if you were looking at recruiting rankings, I mean, everyone brings this up when we're talking about what recruits North Carolina gets and NC State gets. UNC historically kills NC State on average every year in recruiting, but yet NC State is one of the last two. And really, I don't know what the stat is off the top of my head, but NC State has won a lot, since I've been covering the beat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And really, it shouldn't be that way considering how UNC recruits. But yeah, I don't think it would be to the degree that we're seeing, but I still think that there would be some pushback a little bit. But so going back to this season, one of the other questions I had is you bring in Chip Lindsey, who I think he's actually a much better recruiter than I thought initially, just from little things, but I won't get, and I've gotten into it before. But I'm curious because when he was with Gus Malzahn, which he wasn't really the OC, but they ran a completely different offense. It was an offense that, the quarterback was running a ton, which I'm sure they don't want to do with Drake May. So, I mean, how does the offense look that you've seen compared to how it looked last year?
I don't know that we've seen enough to be able to say. Now, Jason can probably break it down and has, but I think the passing game is pretty similar, if not, it's not identical. They'll do some different things. And of course, Tez Walker's availability will make a gigantic difference, whether he's out there or not. Will be a big difference. But I think where the offense is going to look different is they're going to be more intentional to run the football and get north. We saw a lot of inside run yesterday in practice, and where it was just straight up, you go offensive line, defensive line, no wideouts and all, and go at it. And so I think that's going to be a main feature. I hesitate. Here's my thought on Chip Lindsey. And I stole some of this from Greg Barnes. And Greg, shout out to Greg for mentioning it. Chip Lindsey's under a ton of pressure, I think.
Yeah, because
he gets brought in, and Carolina's offense, there's some shortcomings in certain areas, but just on grand scheme of things, Longo's offense was the best that North Carolina's ever had as far as scoring and all that. And now Lindsey comes in. He's got Drake May, who everybody says is, if not the best quarterback in the nation, top two.
Mm-hmm.
He's here presumably for 1 year. You've got an offensive line that is, like I mentioned before, as old as it gets in college football. I mean, it'd be tough to have offensive line with more experience than North Carolina has right now there. And you've got potentially now a receiver that is could be elite on the outside with Walker if he's able to play. You've got McCollum, and then you've got a few young guys, and you've got a running back room that has as much talent on paper as they've had in a long time. He has to produce this year.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Because next year, who knows who's in those positions, especially on the line and especially at quarterback. So I think Lindsey's job. Everybody says just don't screw it up. Well, it's not quite that simple. He's got to devise a plan because whatever happened in the last 4 games of the year, and we can debate that, whether Longo was gone or whatever, North Carolina's offense was slowed down significantly. So how does Lindsey create something that doesn't happen? Because if I'm South Carolina, I'm doing exactly what NC State did or exactly what Georgia Tech did. So that is his rub to deal with, and he has to do it with the expectations that are about as high as they get.
No, I think you hit it exactly. I mean, because if everyone's going to forget how the offense performed towards the end of the season, if the offense hasn't performed well this season, they're just going to remember Longo as this, high on the pedestal sort of thing. They're going to forget all that. That's just how it is. But so I know a lot of people don't like, and you mentioned there are reasons why you can't trust what national media people say because they don't follow these teams closely. But I definitely find value in listening to what Greg. I think Greg is from a breaking it down from just a memory standpoint is just on a completely different level than everybody else. I'm not just saying because he works with me, because I talk badly about Tommy all the time.
You absolutely do, and I'll freely admit Greg is as good as it gets in getting in the weeds with
Yes,
statistics and facts and all that kind of stuff. It's
absolutely,
fascinating to
and
listen to.
applying it properly.
Yes.
But I do think that there is value because I think you can get too deep into the forest. You know what I mean? And
Right.
I'm saying that taking different. I'm a big take different views sort of person. You know what I mean? So I do think there's value, especially like. I mean, the podcast I was listening to was the Cover Three, which I think they do a good job because I think Bud Elliott does a really good job of analyzing things, and definitely from a gambling standpoint, which I mean, he's trying to make money on these things. I mean, he's a legitimate trying to gamble. And so his point was that there are question marks with Mac Brown's coordinator hires. And I think he's right. Now, obviously, if the offense comes out and looks great against South Carolina, I mean, that's going to be on that's going to be on national television. Then a lot of these question marks just completely go away. If the defense looks really good, even though South Carolina, I don't know, South Carolina's offense is kind of weird. I don't, I don't know if it's a great measuring stick, but if it looks really good, it's going to help Chiswick's kind of the perception of Chiswick. You
Yeah.
know, so so yeah. Do
There's a
we want?
ton of moving parts. The thing is that fans are there's a wide gamut of fans for every school, and that's no different at North Carolina. I mean, if they beat South Carolina by 1 point, 61-60, that's a win. But there will be a group of people that you know have lost their minds, and I understand that. Um, but the bottom line
I don't
is
know if
they
South
need to.
Carolina is capable of putting out that many points, but I know the point you're getting at, but I'm thinking I don't know that offense. They don't trust what's his name, God, the transfer from Oklahoma.
Rattler, I
They
don't
don't
know.
trust Rattler. I don't
Some of
know.
them.
Some
Either way, I mean, I think there's a lot of pressure on this North Carolina man. We're getting
yeah,
out
yeah,
of the
yeah.
recruiting aspect of it, but I think, it does affect. You mentioned these 2025 kids. North
Well,
Carolina needs to have a good
well, and
season,
then
but
also this is selfish for me. I'm not able to. I was talking to a parent here at the scrimmage, and they're asking me all these questions about the team, and I'm like, I don't freaking know. I don't go to these practices. I try to read the scoop stuff that we post, but I'm at high school practices, throughout the week. So that's monopolizing a lot of my time. So I'm just trying to educate myself, and I know Tommy knows this stuff. Tommy's out there, trying to dig up all the nuggets and all that. Um, so
I,
anyway, but do you want to get to our top five, or do you, or
let's get to the top five. I was trying to look through and see if there was any deep questions, and there's some questions in here. I'll
okay?
kind of do them rapid fire. But top five UNC football players, important UNC football players this year for the season. First of all, Preston asked a question right out the gate, and I want you to answer this, and you've got 1 minute to answer it.
1 minute.
2025 seems stronger at the top. How deep is the 2025 class looking early?
Are you saying
And
I'm
we'll say
long-winded?
you can be. No, actually, you're not. But you went on for a while today. It was like the longest time you've spoken straight through. I was impressed.
Uh,
2025 North Carolina class. How deep is it?
yeah. So I think it seems like it's going to be deeper than the 2024 class, and I think actually the 2026 class is going to be even deeper. If for those who've been following it, the 2021 class was at least during the internet era, which starts about roughly 2002, was the best in-state class for the state of North Carolina. And it just seems like, and COVID kind of contributed to this, but it seems like since then, there's been like, the regressing to the mean a little bit, with the classes haven't been all that great. But it's slowly, when you kind of look at the numbers, it's slowly kind of trickling up. And the 2024 class is actually better than what I initially thought. And I think the 2025 class will be, a step above that also.
Indeed, indeed. 2025, they're going to be juniors in high school. How old we get?
Is there any
Uh,
other questions in there?
Will Reason asks, I was wondering how much the Jordan brand helps recruiting in football and basketball. I see videos and posts online of how excited the guys are when they get the shoe deals or the shoe drops. Is that a big deal in recruiting?
So I think it definitely is something that resonates with kids for sure. It's kind of like I always like to ask kids, when I do my intro stories with kids, the first interviews, what schools did you like growing up, just to kind of get a feel. And it's crazy how much I hear about Oregon, and it's because of the jerseys, you know? And so I think the Jordan brand is not on that level, but it's definitely something that kids have mentioned. Oh, UNC is, Jordan brand. Now, no kid is going to choose to go to UNC because it's sponsored by Jordan, just like no school is going to choose to go to Oregon because you'll wear like 52 different jerseys by the end of your career. But it helps. It definitely helps. And it's definitely something that for a kid who is probably not focused on the right things, is definitely going to resonate with them for sure. I mean, Jordan Ship mentioned that to me. As
Yeah.
something that he thought was really cool was that the Jordan brand. But he didn't pick North Carolina for that. He picked North Carolina because of his relationship with Lonnie Galloway, because it was a school that he grew up rooting for, and because of the offense.
Have you ever heard a kid say, "Man, I can't wait to put on those New Balances, those New Balance cleats"? I started to
No,
say
but
Puma, but I don't know if anybody know what Puma and Kugas were.
well, my wife's a big Puma wearer.
Well, they used to have Kugas,
The Cougars.
Cuga. They were
Uh,
knockoff Pumas back in my day. Yes. All right,
but
let's go
but
to the top.
nobody says, "Hey, I can't wait to put on that Adidas."
I wasn't going to do that because that would seem a little petty. But I do have a pair of Adidas. They're my walking shoes, my old man walking shoes. Will Reason, appreciate the shout out. I'm not going to read that off. That's a little embarrassing, but I'll take it. Shout out to that. All right, I'm trying to narrow down the top 5 North Carolina important players. All right, Alan Minton. I'll give it to you, and I think you clarify it later. But OL, DL, Huzzy, Drake, Hardy / Biggers, Preston, Drake May, Cedric Gray, William Barnes, Caleb Hood, and the eligibility office. I think I'd probably move the eligibility office up on the list. Hubert B. Hoyle, top 5, Drake, Huzzy, Miles Murphy, Ryan Coe. That's a big dude, man. If they
Yeah.
need a 4th-string linebacker, bring the kicker in. And a Marion Hampton, Sean Crowley, May, Barnes, Gray, Huzzy, Brooks in a comeback year. Says Murphy is very important. Obviously, Alan Minton clarified and said William Barnes and Miles Murphy. Will Reason, Drake May, Cedric Gray, Ryan Coe, Tez Walker, if available, and the entire defensive line. Just a question that Will asked. You think McCollum steps in even more without Tez, or could that hurt his numbers? I think McCollum's going to have a big year either way. Of course, he'll get
Yeah,
a
he plays
lot
a different
more.
sort of role.
Yeah, and he'll get a lot more freedom of movement, I think, with Walker out there. But I think either way, he has a big year.
You think
Okay,
so? So it isn't McCollum and oh God, forgetting his name from Kings
Pacer,
Mountain, Pacor. Are they playing the same sort of position?
they are slots, but I think both can certainly be on the field together. I think Pacer can play outside. I think McCollum can play outside if necessary. I
Okay.
think ideally you want McCollum in that slot
Hmm.
because he's a problem for anybody, but he's a problem for a nickel corner or
Yeah.
an outside linebacker
He's a
trying to cover
stalky.
him.
Yeah, he's a stalky guy. In addition to his quickness.
Yeah, and he dropped a pass in practice yesterday, which I think shocked everybody that's paying attention because he's got one career drop at Georgia Tech, and
Okay.
he was quite irritated at himself for that. KM Shires, May Heisman, and Maxwell, these are the award list or the award things they're up for. Tez is Blitnikoff, Gray, Nagurski, and Drew Little's up for the Manley. I think that's the long snapper award. So a lot of good answers there. Let me back that out, make sure nobody has Randy M's, May, Omarion, Marcus Allen, Evans, and Barnes. See, there's somebody that knew like Cougars. It felt like the seams on the Cougars were like put together with like spiderweb or something. Because if you walked funny, your toes would be sticking out the end of them. All right, Don, top 5 for you, important
All right.
players.
So 5 all the way up. Number 5, let's see, do I have 5? Okay. Tez Walker, and that's obviously contingent upon the NCAA because I think, well, at least Longo's offense seemed to do really well when it had a true deep threat. I think that's what he is. I liked what I think it was Allen did where he listed certain groups because I think I listed Miles Murphy. I think that they, as I mentioned earlier, they need to get more pressure on the backfield in the run game, and then also on the quarterback, which Murphy obviously handles both. And I mean, so does Kamen Rucker, who's my number 3, but more Rucker. I'm hoping for North Carolina's purposes that he provides that pass rush and gets the rush on the quarterback that they need it. I put also Elijah Huzzy, although I think probably I could bump him down and put the pass rush up a little bit higher, just because I think it would be good for North Carolina because there's a lot of teams that they're playing, may not have a whole lot of great receivers. So if they only have one good receiver and he's able to blanket them, that'd be awesome. And number 1, I don't see how anyone can not have Drake May number 1. If Drake May, can't play the full season, the season, I mean, everything changes dramatically. I don't think there's another player on this team that you can say that about.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Mays, he needs to improve some things. We've talked about it a lot on our other broadcasts, but he is clearly the most important player on that roster. We saw what he means last year. I think it'll be more of the same. I think a guy on defense like Cedric Gray is the same way. I mean, Cedric Gray played 900 plus snaps. He is the guy in the middle there. They need to figure out how to get some linebacker depth, but Cedric Gray needs to be on the field as much as possible. I think Huzzy's ability to shut down a third of the field is big, very big, especially given the unknowns at this point with the defensive line. They go hand in hand. A lot of people are saying Miles Murphy. I'm gonna go with I'll say Miles Murphy too at that position. I think that position is important. I think Des Evans needs to have a big year. We've laughed and joked a little bit about when Gregory Hall, shout out Gregory, predicted he'd have 10 sacks a couple of years ago or last year, and he hasn't produced. I think they've got to get something out of Des in the pass rush game. There's so many to think about. I think Jonathan Adorno on the offensive lines is pretty important if he's going to be the guy at one of the guard positions, right guard, I believe. He's got to be better because Drake May struggled with pressure up the gut. Most quarterbacks do. And I think that's an important position. A lot of people talk about William Barnes out at left tackle. I'd love to see a situation where they could move Diego Pounds there and slide Barnes back inside. But, if you're going to group them, and I said it watching practice yesterday and I said it on the shows last night, this season boils down to the lines. They are the difference between 8 wins and 11, 10 or 11. And, and that's across the board, both of those position groups. And we talked about it earlier, is how good are they or are they going to be better? We'll see. But I think those make it that much more easy for this team to get to that 10 or 11 wins if those lines both are above average. For the defensive line, average would probably be sufficient. And then Tez Walker needs to play. Jason sort of outlined the importance of having a deep threat, and Walker is that. We remember Diami Brown against Clemson, the first series of the game against Clemson. He blows straight, and in 2019, he blows straight by their corner, who's now, an all-pro cornerback, and he made him look silly. And then that game completely changed on that play, and North Carolina had a very good opportunity to beat the number 1 team in the country. That's how important a guy like Walker is. Anything left, Don? We've got an MVP. We'll talk after that, after this for the MVP.
Yes. No, I think that's basically it. There's not a whole lot going on recruiting-wise. We have bunch of stuff coming up on underclassmen. I know some people are like, wait a second, the 24 class is basically done. We got to move on to the underclassmen. Their visit is going to be important during the fall. So I'm doing what I can to kind of introduce everybody to those underclassmen and get information on those guys out there.
Yeah, it is an interesting time as the season is getting closer. Stay with Inside Carolina for, of course, complete reports on all the breaking news, Walker news, player profiles. Tomorrow, like I mentioned, Graham Boone and Joey Powell podcast drops. It's a fascinating listen on the importance of Heals for Life and the opportunity folks have to be a part of that and to get some understanding of what they do and how North Carolina is going to use the collective in the recruiting game and in the game in general. We've got a realignment podcast tomorrow. I guess
Really?
tomorrow night. Yeah, we're going to get together and have a roundtable. Should be quite spirited on this realignment stuff.
Man, why don't I get invited to those things?
Do you want to be on that one?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah. So SEC or ACC or Big Ten?
Um,
It's a
I
hot
mean,
take.
I would,
I
I
need a
would
quick
like,
answer.
I would like I would like the ACC to stay together. That's what I would like. I think the SEC makes the most sense as far as like culturally and what the fans would want. The Big Ten doesn't make a whole lot of sense with all that sort of stuff. But I mean, really, I would like the ACC to stay together.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting next few years to see how this all shakes out. It's crazy though how it's almost like when you're in a group of people and somebody runs, or there's a loud noise and somebody runs,
Yeah,
and then everybody's nice and calm. Loud noise, somebody runs, and everybody starts running. That's what it
yeah.
feels like in this realignment stuff. Colorado makes a move, and then it's like everybody's like, "Oh my God, it's happening!" and everybody's moving around.
Well, if you
We're
look at
talking,
the stuff that, and I know we don't want to get into this, but if you look at the stuff that the Pac-12 was offering and getting offers from, it wasn't very enticing for anyone to stay. So I think that kind of opened the door completely.
yeah, we
So
got a
the
sandwich. You can get a sandwich and a drink combo if you'll stay in the Pac-12, and they were all like, "Peace, we're out of
yeah,
here."
yeah. So
Nuts. It's crazy time in college athletics, but a lot of it being discussed at Inside Carolina. Join us live tomorrow night, 9 o'clock, as the roundtable crew gets together. Don and I will be back next week for another noon dish. Maybe there'll be some surprising news. We'll see. It'll definitely be a top five. And what press box will Don Callahan be in next week? Check us out one
you
week
never
from
know.
today. Thanks, Don.
All right. See you later.